on this particular issue. It's not about emissions and GHG for the most part. It's about what it would do to the natural habitat if something were to go wrong. So Lisa, the conversations will continue here, obviously, and I know you made the point about the signals it sends to investors and to capital, and they could be discouraging. So what is the next move? I mean, it was important for the Prime Minister and Minister Hodgson to meet with the people he met with today. What is the next move there if you're the government, industry, Alberta, and you want to try to move this along?
I think it's in the hands of Alberta, quite frankly. You need to be a proponent and you need to have a project and you need to advance it. I think my point, and I'm not deluded, Nathan, you know that. My
Sorry,
point
so I
here,
wasn't calling you deluded, Lisa. I apologize.
He meant diluted,
no,
like the bitumen. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead.
my point, not diluted, diluted. And my point being, gentlemen, that the reality is that, like I said, we don't necessarily have a project right now, but I also don't believe that we should not discuss the possibility of a project in the future. I don't like absolutisms. You're using the word impossible. You're saying the science will never change. Of course it can change. You can figure out a way to encapsulate it in clathrates if you want to try to figure out how to get rid of the bitumen so that it's not going to wash up where it is. There's always work that can be done. There can be mitigation done with the types of tankers going up and down. Impossible is not something that we should be considering, because the other side of the ledger is what happens if that becomes the only game in town? What happens if that becomes the most important thing that we could possibly provide to the world? And yet we're all sitting here today saying it's impossible. I don't think everything is impossible, other than David saying something nice about the Conservatives. That could be impossible.
Oh, shots.
All right.
There you have it, guys. Today is Thursday, January 15th. This is Canuck News. Guys, today's story, guys, this isn't about Donald Trump. You can see what's on the screen. It's not even really about Jerome Powell, right? It's about Canada. Because when the Bank of Canada publicly rushes to defend the U.S. Federal Reserve, guys, this isn't diplomacy and it's not courtesy. It's a warning sign. It tells you something uncomfortable about how exposed Canada has become to decisions made outside of this country. Decisions that we just don't control. And we can't escape either. And the wider story here, from the way I see it, right, is that the U.S. Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation into the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, after pressure from Donald Trump to cut interest rates. So Trump wants lower rates fast, and he believes that cheaper money will actually continue to drive growth even higher, possibly even as high as 6%. I actually saw this. Howard Lutnick was on the All-in-One podcast. I watched that interview. He literally said, we're pushing towards 5% growth. With lower interest rates, we could even push that up to 6%, and that would essentially give them all of this leeway to grow the economy much faster than the debt is growing, in essentially to balance all of that out. Powell refused, and almost immediately, Canada Central Bank governor here, Tiff Macklem, stepped in publicly to give Powell his full support, emphasizing the importance of central bank independence. And guys, and on the surface, this sounds principled, but underneath, honestly, I think it's far more practical and more fragile than we expect. And honestly, mad respect to Tiff Macklem for this, because he really seems to be sticking out for the best interests of Canada. I'm going to get into the article a bit and then go through my thoughts. The Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem came to the defense of his U.S. counterpart Jerome Powell on Monday as the chair of the Federal Reserve faces a criminal investigation from President Donald Trump's Justice Department. Powell said Sunday that the U.S. DOJ had subpoenaed the Fed late last week in connection with his testimony he gave to the Senate in June about a renovation project to Federal Reserve buildings in Washington, D.C. Powell alleged the threatened criminal indictment was a response to independent monetary policy makers south of the border refusing to lower interest rates per Trump's wishes. Macklem, who also spoke in Powell's defense, back in September as pressure mounted from the Trump administration, said in a statement Monday that the Fed chair reflects the very best in public service and has his full support. Chair Powell is doing a very good job under difficult circumstances, guiding the Fed to take monetary policy decisions based on evidence, not politics. So it seems like they're buddy-buddy, right? It seems like the Bank of Canada has taken an official political stance to support the Fed. I think he's doing this out of much more practical reasons because of the state that the Canadian economy is in and the Canadian dollar specifically, right? And so it says the Bank of Canada and the U.S. Fed both operate independently from government and set interest rates in an effort to keep inflation at 2% annually. The Fed has an added dual mandate to promote maximum employment in the U.S. economy. Trump has lashed out at Powell for not cutting rates fast enough to boost economic growth. McClem said the independence of central banks is critical to delivering price stability and gives monetary policy makers the space to take difficult decisions that benefit the economy, free from short-term political interference. And so it says a bipartisan group of former Fed chair and top economists on Monday compared the Trump administration's actions to moves made in more impoverished countries. There's always a stab going at Trump, right? They're always pointing fingers. They're always trying to delegitimize his views, his actions, and all of that. I mean, same thing was going on in his first term as well. Not to get into U.S. politics. But it says, as of Monday, financial markets expect neither the Bank of Canada nor the U.S. Fed to cut interest rates at their upcoming decisions at the end of January, according to LSEG data analytics. Some analysts said the market's muted response reflects a widespread belief that Powell could successfully fend off the allegations that his description to lawmakers of the Fed's $2.5 billion project was criminal. So this is pretty interesting. So what's interesting about this year with the U.S. is that they have the midterm elections as well. And so Powell might actually be keeping interest rates or towing a hard line politically as well in the efforts to think that there might be a more balanced Senate very soon coming from the midterm elections, right? And that Trump's power is going to be kind of eroded because of the midterm elections. That's also very possible. But I guess it's all really a waiting game right now. We're really just going to have to see what's gonna happen, right? But to really come down into the way I see what's really going on, right? Canada does not get to run its economy independently of the U.S. And it's not because of politics. It's basically because of gravity. If the U.S. cuts interest rates aggressively and Canada does not, several things are going to happen very quickly. Money is going to be leaving Canada in search of higher returns in the U.S. The Canadian dollar is going to get even weaker. Everything Canada imports, from food to fuel to manufactured goods, is just going to become more expensive. And that's essentially imported inflation. Even if Canada did nothing wrong, all of these things are going to happen. I mean, and this is all a bit oversimplified, but that's kind of a chain reaction, right? And if Canada follows the US and cuts rates just to keep up, it literally creates a different set of problems that Canadians actually feel. First, inflation risks are going to come back, which means the lower rates mean cheaper borrowing. Cheaper borrowing means more spending. But Canada's problem today, it's not a lack of demand, guys. It's a lack of supply and productivity. So instead of creating real growth, rate cuts risk pushing prices higher again, especially for essentials. The second problem is the housing imbalances are going to get worse. Canada already has a housing market distorted by years of cheap money, guys. And what would lower rates really do? It's going to push home prices back up. It's going to reignite speculative buying. And it's going to reward existing owners. It's going to punish renters and first-time buyers even more. And as we know, the youth of Canada is basically given up on owning their own home, right? So housing it becomes an asset game again, and not just a place to live. And Canadian households are among the most indebted in the developed world, guys. Lower rates, they might feel like relief at first, but they really encourage people to stay leveraged instead of actually paying down their debts. Which means when the shock hits, job losses, inflation, or another rate move, households will have no buffer left, guys. And the fourth thing is that structural problems stay unsolved, right? Cheap money hides bad policy. It delays hard reforms around productivity, infrastructure, energy, and industrial investment. Instead of fixing the economy, Canada is going to keep anesthetizing it. So the Bank of Canada is trapped. It's either we move with the US and worsen long-term damage, resist the US, and absorb immediate pain. That's really the bind Canadians need to understand. Maclem isn't defending Powell because he likes him. He's defending the last thing standing between Canada and a forced monetary decision that it doesn't really need right now. The US can gamble on growth, right? In Canada, we cannot. So Trump believes lower rates will unlock explosive growth. The gamble is only possible because the US has things Canada does not. The US has stronger productivity, they have deeper capital markets, domestic energy dominance, massive internal consumer base as well. Canada has none of these things. Canada's growth is really thin. It relies heavily on housing. Its productivity has stagnated for years, and business investment is weak. So when the US takes risks, it gets upside. When Canada copies those risks, it gets instability. This is why American rate decisions matter more to Canada than Canadian ones do. And it's why any destabilization of US monetary credibility hits Canada first. What Maclem stated about independence, the Bank of Canada and the Fed needing to be independent of politics, this is true, right? And so this story it's not just about rates, it's about whether independent institutions can also survive political pressure in an era where economic power is openly weaponized through tariffs, sanctions, trade retaliations, and political pressure on regulators. If the Fed loses credibility, global markets lose their anchor, volatility increases, capital markets become defensive, and smaller economies absorb the shock, right? Canada cannot afford that, which is why Maclem spoke up, not to lecture Washington, quite literally to protect Canada, because Canada has no buffer left. In the past, Canada had different types of cushions, right? We had stable trade relationships, we had predictable capital inflows, housing acting as a shock absorber. We had trust in institutions. Those cushions, guys, they're thinning very fast. Trade certainty is gone. Capital is cautious. Housing is very fragile. Growth is even weaker. And so when external shocks hit now, Canada feels them immediately. This is a serious danger to Canadians. And to tie everything all off here, guys, this moment isn't about choosing sides between Trump or Powell. It's about recognizing reality. Canada is no longer insulated from US decisions. It is exposed to them. And so when the Bank of Canada publicly defends the Fed, it's not virtue signaling, it's survival signaling, quite literally. It's saying if US monetary independence collapses, Canada pays the price first. And that should force harder questions for Canadians, not about interest rates, guys, but about why our economy is so dependent, so fragile, and so reactive that stability elsewhere has become essential to our own. Because a serious country doesn't rely on other nations, and it doesn't rely on their institutions to hold either, right? It builds resilience at home. And right now, Canada hasn't. That's all I have for us today, guys. Hope you guys liked today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Cabernet. Ay, kick your ass all hockey season.